Now, the most powerful body in the UN is its Security Council. Africa, in the meantime, is the only region without a permanent seat on it. The continent is eyeing at least 2 permanent and 5 non-permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council. Everisto Benyera, Associate Professor of African Politics in the Department of Political Sciences at Unisa, joins us now to take us through these prospects. A proper pleasure. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Nolutando, for having me, and good afternoon to the listeners.
Thank you for being with us today, Prof. Maybe we can start off by reflecting on how it's happened that the African continent not be represented on the UN Security Council.
The United Nations system is a product of the post-Second World War global order, where the victors of the Second World War consolidated themselves into what we today call the United Nations Security Council, and they accorded each other veto-wielding power. This excluded those that were not part of this so-called World War II, which was not a world war by any chance. And these are the circumstances under which Africa and the Global South generally find themselves excluded from influential positions in the United Nations system, where we were invited as a way of managing our decolonial expectations. This is the brief background as to why Africa and the Global South are not that represented in these powerful positions at the global body.
We must also then reflect on the work of the UN Security Council. Like you're saying, it is a part of the UN that was established based on the World War II here. What work does it do today, Prof? What makes it a relevant body that Africa might want to be a part of it now?
It is the only multilateral institution where each country is a member of, and where the ideal of state sovereignty is recognized and upheld. Remember, a country can only exist if it is recognized and acknowledged by its peers. And one of the bodies that has got that responsibility to coordinate that is the United Nations. While we are saying the United Nations is not perfect, we are saying that it should not be done away with. Rather, it must be revised in order to act as an instrument of restorative justice, as a means of atoning for Africa's exclusion, as a way of giving equity and voice to the Global South. So the United Nations is very important. The United Nations Security Council is more important, but they must be inclusive of all, not just the victors of the Second World War.
I must ask you here, the African continent asking, I think, for 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats. That tells me that as a continent, we would have to consolidate voices to fit within these 7 seats here, Prof. And that maybe takes me back to the AU as an effective body for the consolidation of ideas and priorities for the African continent.
That is our biggest challenge, Nolutando, that as Africans we do not speak with one voice. Just look at the chaos that erupted at the Pan-African Parliament in Midrand, where we found ourselves divided into Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, and Lusophone Africa. So we still pay allegiance to our colonial past, as if we cannot leave our colonial past and forge a decolonial future without the incumbents of our history. So as Africa, whether at the United Nations or at the African Union or even at SADC, we rarely speak with one voice. So when we get these 2 permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council, the problem that we are going to face is how are we going to allocate them? Are we going to rotate them? That today it's ECOWAS and SADC, tomorrow it's the East African Community, and so on and so on. As long as we as Africans, we do not put our acts together, we will remain marginalized. As of now, we are still dependent on our former colonizers to protect us through what is called the pen holder system of the United Nations Security Council. So yes, we need to put our acts together so that when we get those seats, we know how to allocate them.
Let's talk about then the work that we've done to date to negotiate our way onto the UN Security Council, how that has been received by those who are already part and members of it, and whether, the arguments that we've put forward at this time do show a legitimate cause for Africa to be on the UN Security Council.
Yes, Luthando, Africa has to be legitimately on the United Nations Security Council, but we must manage our expectations, because those that are on the United Nations Security Council will not agree to everybody joining, because this is the most powerful body in the world. It can function, it can impose binding resolutions like what they did with Libya and many other that are being still passed today. So while we are legitimately calling to be there, while our calls as Africa are legitimate for us to be at the United Nations, we must manage our expectations, because those that are there, especially the United Nations, will not easily accept us to join and share power. Remember, power in politics is not ordinarily given. In most cases, power is taken, power is seized.
Before I let you go, Prophet, then I must also ask you here, we have seen, a genuine acknowledgement of the African continent from both the global north, I think maybe let's say the west and the east, maybe. And what we have seen is that even with the consistent and public assertion that Africa is important, we don't see invitations to bodies like this. Like you're saying, we kind of have to assert ourselves, insert ourselves very forcefully into these places. And for me, it really is maybe a bit of a conundrum in that regard, that there would be an acknowledgement that Africa is important, but not important in places where decisions are made.
One thing that we must acknowledge, Luthando, is that the world that we live in today remains hierarchical. The most powerful nations, economically and militarily, are the ones that organize the rest. So power has always been skewed against the global south, the formerly colonized countries, and in favor of the former colonizers. So while we got political independence, we are yet to get economic independence. We even haven't started thinking about epistemic and cognitive independence. And the former colonizers are always ahead. Today, the fight is no longer about extracting slaves from Africa or extracting natural resources or extracting gold and oil. It is now about extracting big data. It is about extracting the epistemes and the knowledge systems of Africa and appropriate them as if they belong to the global west. So we are way behind in Africa in terms of the decolonial fight that we need. Yes, political independence was okay, but economic independence is better. Epistemic and cognitive independence is the best, Luthando.
Well, Prof, always a pleasure getting your thoughts and insights. So thank you for your time today. That was Everisto Benyera, Associate Professor of African Politics in the Department of Political Science at Unisa.